I've got another surprising story for you, Caitlin.
I'm listening.
PepsiCo is increasing the size of its bags of chips.
That's something you don't read every day. A complete opposite to shrinkflation. Do we even have a word for this yet, Andrew?
So, PepsiCo is apparently reversing cuts to selected bags of Tostitos and Ruffles. They're adding 20% more chips to win back frustrated shoppers, Caitlin.
Well, this could be a response to the rise of store brands, which obviously we covered in our very first episode, of course. There was a story out last week, actually, that predicted that private label groceries here in the U.S. are on course for a 30% market share within the next 10 years. So that's considerably more than the 19% of consumer spending, which was recorded in 2023.
Yeah, I think Pepsi are clearly trying to improve value for money for its shoppers, but without cutting prices. And as we learned from our last episode, of course, they're also pulling out all the stops to keep up with rising numbers of experimental shoppers. I really enjoyed your interview with Dr. Mary Karuncha.
I enjoyed it too, Andrew. She's lovely. And what became clear for me there was that PepsiCo expects new and novel product experiences to deliver a higher proportion of future sales revenue.
Which is a great point on which to introduce this episode of Impact Makers, Caitlin, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Welcome, one and all, to the Discovery Era. So, Andrew, what exactly is the Discovery Era?
Yeah, I know, it's rather cinematic, isn't it? I'm such an attention seeker. But from the ton of research that I've been leading here at MMR, it is clear to me that the world's consumers are becoming more open to discovering something new on a regular basis. As you said in our last episode, it's as if this prolonged period of people sticking to what they know is coming to an end, and they're now ready to really move on and switch to something new. And many commentators, including myself, have been forecasting this post-pandemic rise in experience-seeking shoppers. And I think now it is a thing.
And presumably to be successful, brands will need to get more new stuff into stores to maintain sales and share. I have a story for you that might show that the Discovery Era is indeed a thing. So last month, L'Oreal reported that its Q3 sales had actually missed expectations. And they said that we need to bring new stuff to get consumers excited. They believe that the slowdown for the Derma division, for example, here in the U.S., is largely due to a lack of new consumer products.
Well, there it is, Caitlin. It's like a microcosm of how the Discovery Era is playing out. And to quote Mintel, for the first 5 months of this year, just 35% of global CPG launches were genuinely new products. So the rest, 65%, were cases of renovation. And many of these cases related to cost engineering, that shrinkflation you mentioned. Now, later, I'm going to be quizzing an ex-Mondelez pro to speculate on how brands should react to this shift in consumer needs. How should multinationals, for example, plan their innovation and renovation budgets to make sure that there is more new products out there for consumers to discover?
That should be really good. And there will be more from Shania at the Together Agency to keep us all in the loop on what's new on TikTok. Now, surely TikTok is one of the biggest culprits here, right, Andrew?
Well, if not a culprit, it is certainly a catalyst. During a recent MMR webcast, you were co-presenting with me, weren't you, Caitlin? Delighting the
That's
new
right.
consumer. We said that TikTok's emphasis on you is fostering a culture of exploration, isn't it? And we showed how the social media hype cycle, thrill-seeking, FOMO, they're all conspiring to drive trial for modern shoppers. Now, where there's hype, of course, expectations will be high. And whilst marketers dream up the next high-octane concept, it's important that the product experience plays out at the same sort of elevated intensity. Now, earlier, I talked to Rachel Smith from MMR's Sensory Science Unit to record this episode's Glimmer or Gimmick. Hey, Rachel, you've been on safari.
Hi, Andy. Yep, I have. Not your typical safari. This was a sensory safari with our colleagues, so essentially a deep dive into an emerging trend. Our aim here is to experience the trend and assess potential applications across mainstream products.
Okay, and what have you got for us?
Well, we wanted to discover how food, beverage, and personal care innovators are using sensory-based sensations to elevate experiences for consumers. So traditionally, manufacturers have focused on aroma, appearance, texture, and flavour. But more recently, we've seen some manufacturers take things to the next level.
Now, can you give us examples of these sensations?
Sure. So these are sensations such as astringency, warming, cooling, numbing, fizzing, foaming, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So pretty much like the Sprite Chill product that Caitlin tried. She said it had a cooling sensation the more she sipped. Yeah?
Yeah, that's a perfect example, actually. And also, as Caitlin said in your beverages episode, this product is an early mover in the sensation scene. So to discover more examples, we rummaged a number of retailer shelves to source products that add a further layer to the sensory experience. And we found that sensory sensations were frequently deployed to boost users' perceived efficacy of the product, and also brought a measure of joy whilst doing so. So foaming face masks are a great example of these, and I got to try them out, which was really fun. But even more mundane categories, such as stain removal, are using sensations to help with perceived efficacy as well. So sensations such as fizzing provide an extra visual cue that reassured us that the product was working.
Okay, and I guess it all adds up to a much more multi-sensory experience. Yeah.
Exactly. So these kind of initiatives find consumers leaning into product experiences more deeply, from a passive to active engagement. And something else we found was products that generate perceived temperature changes. So certain compounds, such as menthol, activate skin receptors to provide a cooling effect without any actual change of temperature occurring. And this can support perceptions around hydration in an eye serum, for example. And in the opposite direction, we experienced warming sensations in several no and low spirits, actually including Lewis Hamilton's Armagh, which you reviewed in your very first episode.
Yeah, we did that. And I think it was a good example of a product that reminds us that the taste buds don't just perceive flavour, right?
That's right, yeah. And that's actually because we have this nerve called the trigeminal nerve, which detects perceived physical and chemical changes in our mouth. So ingredients such as capsaicin or black pepper, they can actually trigger this nerve and activate feelings of mild pain or tingling.
Mild pain. Okay, well, yeah, Caitlin knows all about that, doesn't she? Now, we asked you to review a specific product for our Glimmer or Gimmick feature. So did you manage to find one, Rachel?
I actually did. And not only does this product actually elevate the sensory experience, it's also a great example of inclusive design. So the product is Shiseido's Visionary Gel Lipstick. It incorporates technology in ways that guides visually impaired users on exactly where to apply their lipstick by feeling how cold it is on their lips. So we think that utilising temperatures and other sensations has enormous potential for brands seeking to be more inclusive, whilst also affirming efficacy and raising the bar on more multi-sensory experiences.
Okay, and the listeners, of course, can go to our Instagram. They search at Impact Makers Pod, and they can see the product you just mentioned, the Shiseido lipstick, and all the products featured on today's and all episodes. So what I'm hearing from you, Rachel, is that this is a glimmer, yeah?
It definitely is, Andy, yeah. So post-Safari, we think products that can tap into these sensory sensations can help brands really match up to the hype and also underpin perceived efficacy, encourage social sharing, and solve many inclusive design briefs.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for taking the time, Rachel. We will see you very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
So you've probably heard most CPG companies have been pulling back on innovation. In fact, a report by Boston Consulting Group found that most CPG companies are focusing on short-term innovations, which, of course, generally carry low risk, but yield limited rewards. So is this going to be enough in the discovery era? In a recent webcast, I had the pleasure of talking to Nick Graham. We were drawing on all his experiences working with PepsiCo and Mondelez. And we could have gone on talking, so we got him back. Nick, great to connect with you again. Welcome to the Impact Makers podcast. Last time we spoke, you just moved to Lisbon. Big change from New York. How's that going for you?
It's going very well. It is a beautiful sunny day here in Lisbon. As you know, a little bit of sunshine in the autumn makes a big difference, right, to your mood. So yeah, loving life here so far. And thanks for inviting me back. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
You're welcome. Now, we've had a little time now to reflect on the conversation we had. So can we agree that tomorrow's consumer is going to be more experimental?
in certainly all the work that I've done, we've seen across all the generations, right, this uptick in search for new experiences. You can understand, given the backdrop of our lives, particularly over the last, 5 to 10 years, it's understandable that people are looking for these small breaks from the everyday, these sort of twists on the ordinary. I think it really is this pressure relief valve, right, that people need, and many of us need, to sort of puncture the routine. And then I think specifically for younger generations, so Gen Z millennials, and what we're seeing in the data from both Pepsi and Mondelez is that inherently those generations are just sort of more experimental, kind of in their DNA, in their upbringing, because they really, they've grown up in a world of endless choices, right? Because of social media, because of digital commerce. The old adage that every young generation or new generation, right, discovers the world anew and is open to new things. But I think there is something different about these generations in that their ability to discover things is just so much easier because you can pick up your phone and in seconds you're surfing Portuguese pop or, looking at Oreos from China or whatever it might be. It's just so much more available. And then, of course, with digital commerce, you can literally click right there and in a few days, a few weeks, that thing can be in your hand. So I think it's just the ability and the access to that information is so different with those generations. So in sum, absolutely, I think because of a whole range of different factors, we're definitely seeing a more experimental consumer.
And this culture of exploration means that surely manufacturers need to escalate innovation.
As we covered on the webcast, it's clear that innovation, both the level of output and the sort of the scale and disruptiveness of that innovation has really taken a knock in recent years. And yet, I think through everything you're saying and evidenced in earnings call after earnings call recently, it's clear that innovation has never been more critical. So the industry should want to fall back in love with innovation again. I mean, as we said, I think from a whole range of different factors, the change in digital commerce and social media, the way in which consumers, particularly younger consumers, are engaging with brands and with marketing today means that habit guides about 95% of our decisions. Those habits are inherently being disrupted on a regular basis now, right? So the typical habitual behaviors of I buy this thing week in, week out are disrupted once I can go on social media and discover some brand new thing that I'd never heard of. And so I think the fact that those are being interrupted, that big CPG companies are facing even greater competition from startups means that there's an imperative to innovate, because if you don't innovate, your competitors, the new upcoming upstarts are definitely going to be innovating to grab attention. Your example of the Glossier versus L'Oreal competition there. And I think just as importantly, in sort of facing off that competition, we need to keep consumers engaged in our categories and our brands, even through traditional commerce, because, obviously the product choices, the product set continues to change, consumers' needs and desires continue to evolve. And, that's always the way that our categories have remained relevant, is by innovating, whether it's around sustainability, health and well-being, just pure novelty is what keeps people coming back. And, third, but just as importantly, we need to recognize that there are still very real problems to solve. It can sometimes feel like we've solved all innovation has solved all of our categories' problems, right? But whether it's well-being, sustainability, convenience, economics, there are still real problems that consumers and shoppers face every day, or sort of unfulfilled, unsatisfied needs that they have that are still there, sort of ripe for the picking for innovation.
Yeah.
I really don't think we've scratched the surface, right, of what is possible from an innovation standpoint.
Now, P&G, they point to an ever-repeating cycle of innovation as vital for them maintaining market leadership. And they're now saying that the innovation really must go hard on driving household penetration, because it is this that adds volume. And of course, volume gains is something that the whole industry is really going after right now.
Yeah, I think the example of P&G, L'Oreal, Coca-Cola, right? I think all of those big consumer goods companies at the moment, what you hear them saying is no one can really argue with the value of innovation. Coke said in one of their recent earnings calls that innovation delivered about 30% of their gross profit last year, right? So, whether you're talking startups or big established manufacturers and categories, it's clear that product and pack innovation is one of, if not possibly the biggest net driver of volume growth, and in some cases value growth, right? Where you're innovating into more premium spaces, or into price pack architecture. I think genuine innovation, so more disruptive sort of breakthrough innovation and the cash to fund that really has been woefully short in the last few years. The focus in innovation is very much often on scale and velocity, right? It's that kind of quick turn, speed to return, I should say, rather than about the incrementality, both in the short term and the long term. And the reality is that, the work to create something that is truly disruptive or breakthrough is hard, right? It takes much more time and planning ahead to create those type of innovations. Shareholder companies, right, where there's impatience, where they want quick wins, where they're focused on, the results this quarter. There is just this dichotomy of how to do that type of innovation in a context which inherently drives you towards big bet in terms of velocity and scale, but sort of more close-in innovations that are more likely to be effective in the short term.
Or do you think that there is a crisis of confidence as well as the lack of finance in some cases?
There's a real crisis of confidence, I think. And I think the challenge, as we sort of just implied, is I think that the focus for most companies, big or small, is on that short-term return, right? Whether that's quarterly, whether that's annual. And the reality is that if you're going to be successful in more disruptive breakthrough innovation, you need to take the long-term view to build that innovation in the first place, but also the longer-term view in order to be able to actually see that through. I mean, I remember I left Pepsi, 3-4 years ago, and innovations that I worked on several years before I left are only just sort of hitting the market, right? So some of the work that I did in the taking Mountain Dew and Pepsi into the alcoholic sector, for example, I mean, those literally just started to launch in the last year or so. And the reality is that they are incredibly complex because they require a very different business model. The scale is very different. The velocities are very different. The profit levels are very different, right? And so I think the challenge is that we often just lose patience with those, or the models that we have in our heads about how innovation should work, they just don't work for that more disruptive breakthrough innovation. And I think James Quincy was talking about that as well when he was talking about Coke's entry into the alcoholic sector. And he said, it's a couple of years in and it's still very early days. And most things take a decade to work out whether they're going to get there at scale. And, a minimum of 7 years. And the reality is a lot of companies, a lot of people in marketing or innovation roles, I mean, they're not in that role for 4 years, never mind 7 years, right? And so the ability to see that through and the sort of impatience to see that through means often those innovations, either they never see the light of day in the first place, because either the marketing team, the finance team, somebody kills it early on because it doesn't look like the model of a winning innovation because it looks very different. Or those things die in the market because we're impatient with the slow pace of their growth. Or, in many cases, I know when I worked on some innovations for Pepsi, some really good stuff in sparkling innovation, right, where we were looking at the next generation of sparkling beverages. And the reality is those things needed constant reinforcement with consumers and shoppers because you were asking for a new behavior, you were introducing new brands. And yet, by default, it's always like, well, we can do this in one big bang at the beginning of the year, and then consumers' habits will have changed forever. I mean, that's just not reality. That's not how it works. I mean, it might work for a one-off flavor that you're doing, but in reality, for most big bet innovations, you will need a plan of 3-5 years, maybe, of repeated interventions with consumers and shoppers to start to nudge behavior towards that new innovation. And most, even medium-sized CPGs, never mind big CPGs, they're just not built with that muscle. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, I think.
And where do you stand on renovation? Because if, as we're predicting, there may be an uptick in new products to satisfy rising curiosity in the marketplace, there is an argument that renovation becomes even more important for core ranges. They have got to withstand these attacks. So they have to modernize, they have to upgrade, they have to be current.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not a question of either or, it's how you combine and balance the two, right? So as you say, I think we need truly novel innovation that's going to satisfy new needs, new occasions, new desires that consumers have, and again, continue to engage them in the category. But as you said, we cannot lose sight of the fact that we also need to continue to renovate our existing core product as well. So, Coke did some great work last year. They introduced a new, more Fanta-y version of Fanta. Not quite sure exactly I know what that means. I guess a bit more, I think it's more orangey, but sort of more flavor forward.
Yeah, they dialed up some of the more vibrant orangey notes, I think, probably to help the product withstand store brand competition.
Right, and exactly. And I think that's, from Mondelez, and one of the things I was most proud of is the work that we did on renovation, which, doesn't seem particularly sexy in the context of everything we've just been talking about, but is so critical, and particularly, for big brands like Pepsi, like Cadbury, right, that face not only branded competitors, but often private label competitors as well. And so, we did some fantastic work on Milka and on Chips Ahoy, the cookies brand in the US, where we really did spend several years renovating the product, getting the right balance of chocolatey notes to sweet notes to creamy notes, etc. Right? These are big brands and big product portfolios that you've got a product that consumers still love and still enjoy and still want to go back to. Well, the opportunity, of course, of renovation is just its scale, right? Almost nothing you do in innovation will be the same scale as a renovation. And you can get some good short-term uplift, particularly if you activate around it. So particularly, for example, when we relaunched Milka, we did a lot of in-store activation, display activation, promotion, etc. So that can help you get an additional lift and can improve your repeat rate as well. But the honest truth is, in the longer term, it's less about growth. It's more about sort of loss avoidance and sort of preservation of your existing base. Critically important given the scale of it. To me, it plays a different role from some of that more breakthrough disruptive innovation that we're talking about, which is, again, why we shouldn't think about it as either or, but really just think about how you balance both of these in your mix. Really what you're doing the majority of the time is just trying to hold on to and preserve your base and your base set of buyers. And again, using innovation to help bring in new people, new occasions, back to exactly what P&G said about the role of innovation as a penetration as an occasion driver.
Right. So what's your gut saying about the future of breakthrough innovation, Nick? Arguably, we have been living through this period of predominantly derivative innovation, cost management innovation for some time now.
If we think about breakthrough innovation, I do think it will become more imperative on one hand, because consumer demands will continue to go up. Consumers become ever more fragmented, ever more demanding. And as we said, there's the real challenges of health and wellness, Ozempic, sustainability, increasing competition, right? So the landscape will continue to be challenging. And I think the need for innovation to continue to make the category more appealing, accessible, bring new people in, create new occasions, I think will be critical. The other thing that gives me optimism versus maybe where we've been in the last few years is I do think that breakthrough innovation will become, I'm not sure if easier is the right word, but certainly more accessible, because I think artificial intelligence, for one, already you're hearing a number of consumer goods and other manufacturers talking about AI, the promise of AI in innovation to help us find breakthroughs to things that we're stuck on or sort of ways of thinking. And I also think that new sort of business models and go-to-market models will help us do more test and learning, right? So putting stuff into market earlier in small scale to iterate on it will do two things. One is allow us to really get that mix right, the product right, the packaging right, etc., before we go to the scale, and to learn how to shift consumer behavior. But also I think it will de-risk those more breakthrough innovations, because we'll be able to show proof of concept before we get too far down the line. And hopefully, while that will still require a different business model, a different go-to-market, it will help a lot of those organizations work out how to do it in the right way. So I think there's a whole list of dynamics that I think suggest that innovation will not only become more critical, more imperative, but potentially become more possible for both big CPGs, medium CPGs, all different sizes.
Now, do you think innovation can do more to help support brand equities? Now, I asked this question, Nick, because I'm aware of Reckitt, formerly Reckitt Benckiser, selling off some pretty big household names. You've got Cillit Bang, which goes by various names around the planet, Airwick. They're saying that these brands have lost equity advantage in their categories. Now, isn't this a classic case of perhaps brands relying too heavily on advertising legacies and perhaps not doing enough through the product experience to pep up these equities ongoing?
I think in the case of Reckitt, it might be a bit of both, right? I think the two, to a certain extent, can go hand in hand. So the perceptions of the brand and the perceptions of the product, or the experiences of using the product. I mean, I mentioned this on the webcast that when I was at Pepsi, we did a study on what drives brand equity perceptions. And I think what surprised everybody was just how important product and pack experience was. I mean, I think it was by far the number one driver, far outpacing communication. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? Because, for the vast majority of people, where they experience your brand is they experience it when they see it in store, and they experience it when they use it. Yes, of course, there are incredible iconic adverts like Cadbury Gorilla or Mum's Birthday, or the Pepsi ads like with Britney and Cindy Crawford. But those are often fleeting, right? And they're not always top of mind for people. They might nudge behavior in the moment, but they're not necessarily the thing that people will hold on to. What they hold on to is the experiences they have from experiencing the brand itself, those moments of use, those moments of consumption, and probably even more so in a time of sort of social digital advertising, right? Again, where attention is even more limited, and the ability to kind of break through and tell great stories is even more limited. I do think that fundamental product and pack experience is going to have an even more important role, probably more important than ever before.
Yeah, I think so. And somebody else who's had a bit of an epiphany lately in terms of the power of the product experience has been Mark Ritson. Now, he was reflecting on his stint on the Uncensored CMO podcast. Other marketing podcasts are available with John Evans, reviewing some of the ads that have tested well in the beverage category. And Mark's sitting there with his pint of Guinness reviewing these ads with John. They seem to have a better time of it than we do.
There's always time, Andy. It's a little early for me, but next time.
Yeah, well, he concludes that it was his pint of Guinness and all the effort that Diageo's put into making sure that experience from beginning to end was absolutely perfect, which was it ultimately wins and loses the day. For the Impact Makers team, this was this kind of blissful moment to hear. For marketeers, Mark is suggesting that they get more involved in the P for product, the 4 Ps. So my final question to you, Nick, is that should marketers get more involved?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Mark's article. As always, provocative. Sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. On this occasion, I did agree with him.
Touché.
Again, we sort of neglect, particularly in food and beverage, just how important product is. And, as Mark says, often those small changes that maybe the marketer doesn't even think about make a huge impact in terms of the consumer experience. I mean, I think his example of Guinness is spot on, because if anyone who knows the marketing team there have almost like a religious devotion to the product, right? I mean, they deliver incredible advertising and marketing, but at the same time, they really understand the power of the product experience. And I think he's right to push marketers for not getting their hands dirty, not just with product, but with pricing, distribution, price pack architecture, all these things that marketers may not feel that they are accountable for, but fundamentally they have a critical role to play, and they need to understand how it connects into the total sort of marketing ecosystem. When I was at Mondelez, one of the things I was most proud about is our CMO, Martin Renaud, pushed very heavily on product quality benchmarking. So there we had the CMO saying, no, product quality and taste superiority is absolutely critical. It's just as important as all of these other factors. So I do think that there is an opportunity, a big opportunity for marketers that, again, they don't own all product development and renovation, that's fine, but a more sort of product-centric spirit in marketing and really having respect for and understanding the role that the product and the packaging experience has with consumers and the way that it creates brand equity is still an incredibly untapped opportunity.
Yeah.
Many of us are sitting on brands that need a pep or an uplift of some kind. And very quickly we go to the positioning, the advertising, the marketing, but really understanding, just as you were talking about, right, with Silitbang and Airwick, thinking about the total mix. What are all of the tiny experiences that the consumer has with this brand whether it's, service quality, experience, the product itself, the packaging, all of the touch points, really understanding how they work together and critically understanding again that it is about an ecosystem. Even if you just fix the product and don't fix the brand and the advertising or vice versa, you will not make the impact that you want to make. So I am very hopeful that I think in the context of everything we're talking about, we will see a big shift in time and towards a more product-centric or at least a more product-conscious way of marketing.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's been fantastic to flesh all this out a little bit more with you, Nick. I understand that you've set yourself up as a freelancer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, now living in Portugal. And so if anybody wants to get in touch, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's probably the quickest and easiest way to find me.
So that's Nick Graham on LinkedIn. It's been fun. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, so it's high time we had our regular deep dive into the world of social media and TikTok in particular, uncovering what narratives are building, what products people are discovering. Let's welcome Shania from the Together Agency. Shania, we tend to focus on TikTok on the Z Factor. Is there a good reason for this?
It's a good question. We can take a look at a few stats, and they suggest that TikTok's influence is still very much in the ascent. Stats supplied by Sprout Social find that despite being released all the way back in 2016, TikTok is still the most downloaded app on Apple's App Store.
Wow. And you told us before, I think, that millennials are the platform's fastest growing cohort. Is that right?
Correct. What's also clear is that TikTok has considerable headspace to grow. The platform has just over 1.5 billion monthly active users, making it the fifth most popular social media platform in the world. It trails behind Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Latest predictions show TikTok could reach 2.2 billion users by 2027.
And do you have any figures on how long users actually spend on these apps?
Of course. So while TikTok trails Instagram in number of users, the amount of time users spend on TikTok is far superior. TikTok users spent 4.43 billion minutes watching videos each day, surpassing Instagram, whose users spent 3.19 billion minutes each day through scrolling and watching reels.
And we wonder why the world has a tech addiction problem. Now, as you know, we've been reporting on the discovery era in this episode, Shania. What are the metrics that suggest that TikTok is actually driving actual trial of product?
Well, Sprout Social claims that over 30% of daily TikTok users have used TikTok Shop, which is the in-app shopping platform. And notably, a further 33% haven't used it yet, but they're interested.
So we can take from this that TikTok's impact on the discovery era has further to go. Now, we'd love to hear what you've got for us in terms of trending narratives. Anything you've got to share this time?
So, using up some of my minutes on the platform, I've discovered a wave of TikTokers bringing the coffee shop experience into their homes. This is done by recreating the same aesthetic, such as signage, lighting, and even creating mini menus. Creators are also organizing mini bars and restaurants in their homes for themselves and close friends.
That's really interesting. Do you think that this could potentially be a reaction to the recent cost of living pressures we've experienced?
It's possible, but more likely it's because it all looks like a lot of fun. I think this trend is simply the latest iteration of the staying in is the new going out mega trend. Let's listen.
For my birthday this year, we turned our apartment into an at-home coffee shop for one afternoon only this past Sunday. I've been seeing this trend all over TikTok recently, and I had so much fun putting together all the little details to make our space feel like a real cafe. We created a bunch of little seating areas around the apartment, and we set up the party like an open house where people could stop by throughout the afternoon, order a drink, and hang out with friends.
What else is rising to the top, Shania?
Creators are setting rules for more mundane days. A tick box list or itinerary of must-dos. This trend is brilliantly executed by creators such as Carly Fiebig and Eli Rollo. They almost own this space, but other creators have stepped up too.
Could you give us an example?
Okay, so one example is one creator's list of rules for the perfect Sunday. Waking up at 10 a.m. the latest, putting on a workout set, going for a walk with a planned coffee stop, doing 2 loads of laundry.
Well, Andrew might say that this is intentional living at the extreme.
It's exactly that. And products that can fit into this more intentional approach to daily living could really chime with a TikTok audience. Let's listen in.
Number 3, push yourself to wake up 10 minutes earlier than you normally would. With this 10 minutes, do something that you want to do. Meditate, stretch, Make yourself breakfast. Take a nice shower. I want you to take an informational podcast walk. Let's feed our brains, right? We're still early in the week. We might need some motivation. A TED Talk, Jay Shetty. Again, I don't know what your prerogative is. The Daily, you can listen to the news. Number 5, it's Swiftie and Swifter time. Put on Taylor Swift through your home and do the floors. That's my other Tuesday chore.
We know that TikTok is discovery central these days, so could you give us any examples of brands that are successfully tapping into this?
As you mentioned earlier, Caitlin, new stuff is the lifeblood of the beauty industry. Glossier are doing a brilliant job at creating new products that trend on TikTok. Most recently, they introduced an espresso version of their Balm.com lip product. With the espresso martini cocktail trending and Sabrina Carpenter's hit song Espresso still carrying relevance, it's no surprise that Glossier's new Balm.com is being talked about on TikTok. Plus, to add in a touch of FOMO, they've made them limited edition. Glossier have also put out 2 new scents in their Glossier You fragrance range. Glossier You Rev, which is a cherry or plum scented fragrance, and Glossier You Dew, which is a woody scent. Let's listen.
This is Glossier's limited edition Balm.com Duo. Comes with 2 new colors, Espresso, Biscotti. Let's give them a try. Very sweet coffee scent, similar to the hot cocoa, slightly less red. Now for the fun part, let's try them on. Definitely like having this scent so close to my nose. It would look so good with a lip liner too. And those are the 2 new Glossier Balm.com.
Kudos to Glossier for keeping customers hooked and, most importantly, keeping them loyal by streaming new products to the market. Shania, thanks as always. We love your observations. Curiously, listeners can get a glimpse of products mentioned on our Instagram, the Impact Makers Pod. But perhaps we also need a TikTok account at this point. I'll talk to Andrew. Shania, keep tracking. See you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Caitlin. Always enlightening. Okay, time to discover which brands, if any brands, are putting something genuinely new and novel in front of consumers. And to help us out, we have 2 amazing sensory experts from our New York offices. Hello, Monica Fawani.
Hello. Hi, Andy.
Now, how easy or how difficult was this?
So it was actually quite difficult to find something genuinely innovative these days. In general, we feel that brands nowadays maybe aren't taking as many risks, but we did find a few that are venturing out, opening new occasions for consumers and making their products either more accessible, sensorially engaging, or easier to use. So we've got 4 for you today, and we will keep looking for future episodes, of course. Hershey's recently launched the Icebreakers Flavor Shifters Gum, featuring a never-seen-before flavor-changing technology, which really kept us on our toes sensorially. We tried the berry to clement flavor, which generated anticipation, surprise, and thrills as the experience shifted from fruity to minty. Each of the flavors lasted longer than we expected, with a transition period in between that's likely to spark conversation and social sharing. We regard this innovation as more engaging than any other gum on the market, which typically relies heavily on the mint flavor.
Yeah, it does. And this is really good to see, Fee, because, you know, the world seems to have moved on and the gum category seems to have stayed put, doesn't it? So this helps it keep up, basically. Molly, what have you got for us?
So our second find, Pringles Mingles. We see this as a fan favorite that departs from the can. We were really impressed to find that the bag was actually packed to the brim, just like a Pringles can would be. And this really helps the brand maintain that link that it generally has to generosity and value. And the product itself was definitely differentiated because of its bow tie shape, which we haven't seen before in extruded snacks. And at the same time, it was much airier and lighter in texture, unlike what we typically associate with a Pringles chip. We think there's potential definitely to pull in new consumers who enjoy lighter snacks and at the same time still keep those and excite those long-time Pringles consumers who already trust the brand to see a new product in a completely different pack format.
Yeah, like that one.
The other player that we looked at is extending into the savory movement, and it's Millie's. So this brand has created a sipping broth using a tea bag format, which certainly pushes the boundaries of the tea category. We really enjoyed the Thai lemongrass variant, which was surprisingly refreshing, hearty, and flavorful, and it would especially be good on a cold day. And this format really opens up new savory options for consumers on the go.
And all part of this savoury movement that seems to be gripping both beverages and snacking these days. Fee, you've got one more.
Yes, and we end with a different category this time. We tried the Olay Cleansing Melts, a concentrated, water-activated facial cleanser that generates a really foamy and thick lather when you add just a bit of water. And you would expect Olay to perform, knowing that they are top performers in skincare, and it really did. From opening the pack to the product results, it left our skin feeling refreshed and plumped. Everything really underscored high quality. This is another product that would suit on-the-go occasion, like post-gym, for example, or maybe for frequent travelers who now don't need to worry about liquids leaking out.
Yeah, good point. Now, do we think these product experiences that they could support reasonable repeat rates, or do you think the bubbles burst and, curiosity is satisfied? On to the next thing.
I would say actually a bit of both based on these products. Sophie and I could definitely see ourselves incorporating the Olay cleansing melts into our frequent travel routine personally, for example. And then the Icebreakers really was a thrilling experience and brings so much needed new news to the gum category. And this alone really makes this innovation worthwhile. And I suspect that Icebreakers will last the course because it really offers multiple flavor experiences in that one hit. And there is an underlying value message there.
Yeah. And Fee, what would you say to a manufacturer if you were trying to advise them to compete in the discovery era a little bit harder? What would you say?
I would say to have the courage to surprise your consumers more. Maybe by adding unexpected twists of flavor, unusual textures or formats, and even adding sounds. I think larger manufacturers have more permission than they've ever had before to be a little unconventional in certain instances.
Brilliant. We've seen many players recently toy with mystery flavors and the like, and it's generally worked well, hasn't it? So I suspect there's more to come. Thank you very much for your time, both. That's Fee and Moni. Goodbye.
So, what are your biggest takeaways on what we've heard today, Andrew?
Well, this might sound weird, but I've got a nice warm feeling inside, Caitlin. I think, we're making a product-obsessed podcast here, and it does feel like product is the most trending of the 4 Ps right now, doesn't it? I mean, not least because of what Mark Ritson has been pushing at the moment. I've got his article here. And the bit that really stands out for me is he says, I have learned from 1,000 customers discussing 100 different products. It's the things a company thinks are small are actually, from the consumer perspective, big. And grand improvements the company is spending bazillions on, his words, not mine, are probably of little significance. So finding out from the source what needs to be fixed or changed and then getting it done is the quiet product work of proper marketeers, even if all the credit eventually goes to production and, the product marketing team. He's basically reminding us at the end of the day that it is the product experience that wins or loses the day, I think.
Agreed. And I think we should invite him on, Andrew, don't you? What would you ask him if we had him around the podcast?
Well, that's put me on the spot. Okay, what brought him to this point? His assertion that marketing needs to take product more seriously. Does he plan to revise the product part of his mini marketing MBA? Where he's advising students currently not to get too involved in new product development.
And I think there's a strong case for marketers to become more involved in NPD, not least because of the declining influence of P for promotion. It's getting harder for brands to influence consumers via advertising.
For sure. And of course, there is a continuing role for advertising, particularly advertising that builds that emotional affinity with consumers. But, that is for another podcast.
Now, one thought that struck me through from today's episode is that manufacturers should, in theory, be more successful in securing trial for their new products in the discovery era. If our research stands, people will be more likely to want to try something new.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But I also think, the implication of what you're saying is that securing repeat purchase is going to become less likely. Consumers will be constantly itching, to discover the next new thing.
Oh, absolutely. So your conversation with Nick about the balance between innovation and renovation was definitely the right one.
Yeah, I also think that whether it is innovation or renovation, that product experience itself needs to play a bigger role in safeguarding what the brand stands for and continues to stand for.
And that's exactly why I brought up our partnership with Rexona in Asia on your recent webcast, Andrew. So for listeners, we helped Unilever apply sensory science to a product renovation investment, which actually helped amplify Rexona's ownership of Caring in the deodorant category across Asia. So this guided product improvements to a range of sensory touch points across pact and product, sounds, visuals, and haptics all included. So discovery era or not, we're off to grab some post-recording tea and cookies now, right?
Oh yeah, there's always a place for those products that are just easy, your old friends.
That's right. But we will be back with a seasonal special. We'll be putting some seasonal holiday products through their paces, so keep an ear to the ground for that as we put a few more interesting products on our company credit card.
It's going to be a lot of fun to make.